The only monsters that ever scared little Bria were imaginary. But on November 20th, 2000, just a day before 3 armed men in masks stormed into her home, she called her mom, Michelle, and said she saw someone outside the window. Michelle glanced outside, saw no one, and simply brushed off her daughter's words, attributing it to childish imagination. However, this incident was unlike any previous ones because she saw them when they peered through the window. They had been there the night before, and now these people held Michelle and Bria at gunpoint in the living room of their own home. November 2000. A quiet suburb of San Diego, California. 35-year-old Michelle Renee arrived home from the bank where she worked as a manager. She lived in a rather secluded house with her 7-year-old daughter, Bria. She worked as a bank manager, dedicating much time and effort to climb the ranks over 13 years of hard work to achieve a position where she was trusted and respected. It had been a long day, and she was glad to be home with Bria. They were sitting on the couch, just 2 of them, playing Game Boy, when a deafeningly loud sound erupted from somewhere behind them. Michelle turned around and saw 3 people. They burst into the house as if they were some kind of takeover team. However, this clearly wasn't a SWAT team. The strangers were armed and dressed entirely in black. Michelle and Bria screamed. Michelle managed to notice her daughter darting into another room when she herself was seized by her hair, a gun directed at her face, and thrown to the floor near the couch. They tied the woman with duct tape and then turned her so that she could see her daughter lying face down near the door. Her hands and legs were bound. Bria asked, "Are you going to kill Mommy? Are you going to kill me?" Michelle also believed they had broken in to kill them. But the strangers replied, "No, if the mother does everything we tell her to." They flatly told Michelle, "You will rob the bank for us, or we will kill you, and your daughter will be the first." Illegal intruders informed Michelle that they had been monitoring her for months, knowing she was a bank manager, and had devised a plan. They would spend the whole night with her to instruct and ensure she precisely knew what to do. Throughout the night, the gang leader gave her clear instructions, repeatedly emphasizing what she must do, while they held her and her daughter restrained on the couch with tape. He explained to Michelle that outside, 6 more gang members were guarding, ready to kill her if she made any foolish moves. As if to confirm his words, around 11 o'clock, his attention was drawn to a voice coming from the radio, a female voice. The accomplice informed him that a car had stopped on the driveway. Michelle and Bria's neighbor had arrived. Her name was Kimbra, and she lived in the same building. She returned from a night out and was clearly heavily intoxicated. When the criminals attempted to grab her, she resisted, startling them. One of the criminals aimed the weapon directly at Kimbra's face and yelled not to force him to act. Michelle pushed his arm away to protect her friend, but he aimed the gun at her and hissed for her never to touch him again. Finally, they tied up Kimbra, and together they waited for morning. Michelle realized it might be her last night with her daughter. She had to tell Bria everything she wanted. The woman smoothed her daughter's hair to let her rest a bit, thinking it might be the last time she ever touched her hair or saw her sleeping. In the morning, the nightmare continued. At 6 o'clock, the leader of the robbers ordered her to get up and get ready for work. She dressed and started to arrange her hair when he interrupted her to put dynamite on her. He fastened it tightly on her back with tape, causing her intense pain. The criminals similarly equipped Kimbra and Bria with sets of explosives. The girl cried and asked what it was, but the mother didn't want her to be even more scared and just mumbled something. Then they showed Michelle an object resembling a door lock. The man stated that it was a detonator, and if she made even one wrong move, he would press the button. He added that the detonator had a 10-mile radius. The criminals put Bria in the closet in her bedroom. The mother repeated that she would return soon, that everything would be fine. "Be brave, Mommy," her daughter replied as she left the house. 2 men stayed inside while the leader of the gang handed Michelle a suitcase with a sports bag inside before hiding in the back seat of her Jeep. In a minute, she was on her way to work, as she did every day. But this time, she had dynamite attached to her back and a gun pressed against her side. Upon arriving, she parked in her usual spot, and before getting out of the car, the man stated that she had 5 minutes to come out with the money after the arrival of the cash collector. If something went wrong, his finger was on the detonator. The cash collector arrived around 9 o'clock and delivered the money. As a bank manager, Michelle was responsible for receiving the money. As soon as his car left, Michelle asked her colleague to accompany her to the vault, where she explained what was happening. Her colleague watched in horror as the bank manager did something so unimaginable, but Michelle couldn't do anything but stuff the bag with bundles of money. Her heart raced. Was she doing everything fast enough? Michelle's colleagues, of course, reported the incident to the police, but before that, she left the bank with $360,000. She got into the Jeep and prepared to follow further instructions. After a few blocks, the criminal ordered Michelle to get out of the car, saying she would find her Jeep further down the street, and so it happened. She found her car, jumped in, and sped home. The woman arrived home not knowing if she would find her daughter there, alive. As she pulled up to the house, she immediately noticed Kendra's car was missing. Entering the house, she called out for Bria, but it was eerily silent. Finally, she heard a faint voice. Bria was calling her from the far end of the house. The girl was still in the closet where her mother had left her. The woman embraced her daughter with relief, but it wasn't over yet. Bria noticed panic on her mother's face. The leader of the gang had left, but hadn't removed the dynamite from her. What if the criminals used the detonator from a distance? Kimbra told Michelle that before leaving, they simply removed the dynamite from her back, and the girl by cutting the tape and discarded the explosives against the far wall. Then together, they all ran to the neighboring houses. Soon the street was flooded with investigators from the police, FBI, and even a bomb disposal team. The officers quickly determined that the dynamite was fake, just two red-painted sticks. But considering the dim lighting and the fact that they were on the victims' backs in such an emergency situation, no one would risk their lives assuming they were not real. However, during a truly terrifying 14 hours being held hostage, Michelle tried to memorize any detail that could help identify the criminals. It allowed her to focus not on the horror of the situation, but on something else. In fact, it was her unique ability to notice details in people's appearance and behavior that others might overlook. She memorized the build of the criminals, tried to estimate their height based on the furniture in the house, noted what jeans and shoes they wore, what the weapons looked like. At some point, she needed to visit the bathroom, and the gang leader went with her. When he escorted her to the bathroom, she flicked the switch, brightly illuminating the man's face. Of course, he still wore a mask, but Michelle clearly saw his eyes, quite large, expressive, slightly reddish at the corners. She suddenly realized she had seen this person before, in her bank office. As a bank manager, she often dealt with new client accounts, and just that day, a man came to her office. He explained that he would soon inherit a large sum and needed information about opening accounts and investments. He sat at her desk, asking the same questions over and over again, when finally, a woman entered and said, "Chris, we need to go." The man introduced his companion as Lisa, and they left. But before leaving, he handed Michelle his business card. She placed it in the top drawer of her desk. All these thoughts raced through Michelle's mind, and she thought she needed to be very cautious and by no means show that she recognized him. And she also recognized his accomplice because it was Lisa's voice periodically coming from the radio. If she made a mistake, they wouldn't leave her alive. Now Michelle asked the officers to check the top drawer of her desk as soon as possible. The business card was indeed there, and it wasn't a fake. The man's name was Christopher Butler. The FBI soon learned that Butler was a convicted bank robber. They found out where he lived and put him under surveillance. Butler and his fiancée, Lisa Ramirez, lived just a few kilometers from the bank. Detectives quickly identified the identities of the other two men. Christopher Higgins, a large man, guarded Michelle, and Robert Ortiz, the guy who had his eye on Bria. On December 1st, it was decided to arrest Christopher and Lisa. They were stopped supposedly during a routine traffic stop for document verification. The evidence in the car was simply incredibly vast. There was a pneumatic gun in the glove compartment, but in a stressful situation, it looked entirely real. Furthermore, the officers found a black bag described by Michelle, homemade masks, gloves, Michelle's credit cards, adhesive ribbons for banknotes, and even a door lock that the criminals successfully passed off as a detonator. In the house, two investigators awaited even more evidence. Officers found all the components to create a fake dynamite and a sample of dynamite with Christopher and Lisa's fingerprints. The accomplices left so much evidence because they were confident the crime wouldn't be traced back to them. However, what the officers didn't find either in the car or the house were the stolen $360,000. Arresting Higgins on the same day, they seized $93,000. Higgins confessed to everything and mentioned spending a few thousand on a trip to Vegas. Ortiz went on the run. When he was arrested 3 months later in Wisconsin, he had $32,000 from the bank. He also confessed to everything. However, Christopher Butler denied everything. even when presented with undeniable evidence, his fingerprints on the dynamite. He tried to put the blame on Lisa, but Lisa decided differently. She confessed to being the female voice Michelle heard on the radio. She even admitted it was her idea to use fake dynamite and steal the bank manager. Lisa revealed they split the money into 3 parts, but more than $100,000 their share with Butler were stolen. To everyone's surprise, she claimed Michelle was involved in the conspiracy. The police had to verify everything. They reconstructed the events of that day, and Michelle behaved precisely as a genuine victim of the crime would. All the stories from the victims, Higgins and Ortiz, matched in every minute detail, and investigators couldn't find any evidence that Michelle was involved in the conspiracy. By the spring of 2001, all 4 suspects were behind bars, awaiting trial. However, Michelle and Bria were still coming to terms with that night of terror. The girl desperately wanted to hide somewhere because she believed that the criminals would eventually find and kill them. She transformed from a happy, bold, and lively child into a frightened creature, afraid of being left alone. That's why in June, Michelle took Bria to Alaska to stay with her grandmother. Leaving the child with her grandmother, she returned to finalize everything and moved to Alaska. With her dog, practically no money, and a camera, she embarked on a 9-day journey by car. She had only 9 days on the road because she promised to be back for Bria's birthday. It was only after they moved that their healing truly began. When they returned to San Diego a year later for the trial, Michelle and Bria were ready to face their offenders. The investigators gathered so much evidence that Michelle was convinced the trial was nothing more than a formality. How wrong she was. Christopher and Lisa were tried together, since Lisa confessed during a videotaped interrogation, claiming innocence would be difficult. Thus, her lawyer proposed a deal to prosecutor Tom Manning to save her from life imprisonment, but he rejected the offer. However, since Lisa incriminated not only herself, but also Christopher during the interrogation, the judge was forced to prohibit using her statements in court. Without Lisa's confession, the case relied almost entirely on Michelle's words. Christopher and Lisa's lawyers decided to go after Michelle, trying to shake her credibility. Furious witnesses don't seem reliable to the jury. They succeeded, and Michelle did not perform well on the witness stand. The thing was, Michelle wasn't quite the ordinary victim. For many years, she had worked as a stripper. The woman didn't hide it. It was a choice she had to make to survive at a young age. Michelle fled home at 15 and worked hard to advance from the position of a bank manager to a regional vice president before accepting a bank manager job to spend more time with Bria. Even while working at the bank, she continued exotic dancing for some time. But there was something more that cast doubt on Michelle's honesty as a witness. To get a job at the bank, she faked her resume and other documents, listing skills and experience she didn't have. From a legal perspective, this seemed less than ideal. Additionally, Butler's lawyer delved into her intimate life, trying to portray her as a reckless, selfish mother willing to do anything for money. She had financial difficulties, which could have been a motive for conspiracy. Lisa's lawyer claimed that Michelle lied about recognizing Lisa's voice on the radio since there was no mention of it in the FBI reports. As Lisa's admission was not heard in court, there was nothing to prevent him from boldly stating that the voice heard on the radio was not his client's. Then he questioned Michelle about marked bills, those banknotes that banks keep in safes in case of a robbery and can be traced. The criminals warned her against taking such notes, and she had no intention of putting her daughter's life in danger. But now the lawyer claimed that it was suspicious. He also questioned her maternal instincts. Would a mother run to a house where her daughter is, knowing dynamite is tied to her back? After Michelle's 3-day testimony, it was Christopher's turn. Under oath, he claimed that everything was orchestrated by Michelle, and he had a romantic involvement with her. Of course, he had no evidence, but his strategy was clear. Firstly, he was determined to protect Lisa at all costs. Secondly, the robbery was not considered as severe as kidnapping for robbery, but his strategy worked only partially. The jurors deliberated for 5 days and found Christopher guilty of robbery and kidnapping Bria and Kimbra, but they were not certain about Michelle's kidnapping. One juror believed Butler, and 2 abstained. He was sentenced to 3 consecutive life imprisonments, plus an additional 64 years. Lisa was found not guilty on all counts. The second trial went entirely differently, and both Huggins and Ortiz were quickly found guilty. They were each sentenced to 32 years. As for the remaining $260,000 bank funds, they were never found. So the guilty were serving their sentences in prison. But for Bria and Michelle, it was just the beginning. Their path to healing was not easy. But at some point, Michelle realized that she could be angry and blame all her life's failures on the kidnappers, or she could take control and become an example and support for her daughter. So she did. From scratch, she started her own PR company, spoke extensively in public, shared her story with other victims of assault, and wrote a book, which was adapted into a film, In Captivity. Inspired by her mother's example, Bria pursued her dreams. She joined the cheerleading team at school and, despite being diagnosed with multiple sclerosis at 18, obtained a college education. However, after 20 years since their world was shattered, they had to face the past again. In June 2020, Christopher became eligible for parole. Prosecutor Tom Manning decided he should be present at the hearing. He had a plan. He questioned Christopher Butler about all the lies he told in court. It was a risky plan. Christopher could have insisted on his version and taken the truth to his grave, but he confessed that he and Michelle had no relationship, and she was never involved in the conspiracy. However, he didn't take responsibility for the crime, accusing his ex-girlfriend Lisa Ramirez. He expressed deep regret for what his victims had gone through because of him. Christopher admitted that he regretted his actions and was deeply moved by Michelle's book. Although Michelle and Bria forgave him, they did not support his release, and he was denied several times. Their attitude towards the other two men was fundamentally different, especially towards Ortiz. He was the one who apologized to Michelle in court. Bria spoke at his parole hearing in his favor, and Ortiz was released in January 2021. Now, Michelle and Bria are closer than ever, working together in Michelle's founded company. Michelle wrote another book about her 9-day healing journey to Alaska, which changed her perspective on the world.